Well, we've got a big voice who has jumped into the deep end on recalling Frank White. Good morning, 6:05 on a Thursday. It's good to be here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. We are always streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Sean Smith, Jackson County legislator, friend of the show, who will be here in 1 hour at 7:05. Announced yesterday as the ARPA funding debacle continues in Jackson County. They've been trying to figure out for 3 years how exactly to spend all this money that the county got dumped in its lap late in the COVID era. Well, they may have an answer, but this thing is just creeping towards the finish line. And yesterday, a fed-up Sean Smith said he's done, and he is looking to join the Recall Frank White effort.
The tax assessment stuff, the stadium debacle, the current issue with ARPA funding, which, by the way, the ARPA funding, that's two different legislative bodies, two different groups of 9 people that he's failed to make an agreement with, right?
That was Sean Smith yesterday, courtesy of KMBC Channel 9 here in Kansas City. So Sean Smith has had enough. Now, he's the only legislator who has come out and said, I am going to join the Recall Frank White effort. And good on him. That takes a little bit of a backbone. So he's all in on that. Now, where does that stand? Well, it would require 50,000 signatures by mid-January to get something on the ballot in April to recall the Jackson County executive. And we will see where exactly this thing stands when we talk to Sean Smith coming up in 1 hour. But if you are a Jackson County resident and you have been screwed at every turn, whether it comes to things like your property taxes through that debacle of a tax assessment that's going on 2 years old now, whether it's the issues with the ballparks and how to handle that moving forward, the relationship between the teams and Frank White may be beyond repair. I don't know for sure, but it certainly is not in a good place. And if these teams end up leaving Kansas City, Missouri, it'll be easy to blame Quinton Lucas. People will want to blame Quinton Lucas, but it will be, in large part, much more about Frank White. And then there's this. There's the county sitting on $70 million and having absolutely no idea what to do with it. The legislature has said, we've got ideas on infrastructure projects that we think could be beneficial to the people in the county. And Frank White, according to Sean Smith, when he was on the show earlier in the week, said that Frank is holding out for basically an updated office. It's pretty unbelievable when you think about it. The guy is holding up potentially $70 million, according to Sean Smith, so he can have a nice new mahogany desk, John.
Well, not just him, Pete. It's for Gail McCann Beatty, too.
Yes, and she runs the assessment department. Mm-hmm. Yes, she's definitely worthy of some new offices with the way that that department has been operating over the last 2 years, said nobody ever in Jackson County.
Glory.
Yeah. I mean, that is just a joke. It is a sick and twisted joke. But if you are a Jackson County resident, you know, there have been these attempts to recall Frank White. I think there were 1 or 2 over the years. But this one, if there's ever anything that people are finally going to be fed up about, it's going to be now in this county with everything that is going on. So I will be intrigued to see, and you tell me at 913-408-7957, whether this is something that you're finally on board with, John.
Yeah, I did want to point out that while there's a need to collect signatures by mid-January, we're not starting at 0.
Correct.
Yeah. We've got, I don't know, maybe 20,000, I think, was sort of a figure I remember last time. Going maybe into the spring, we had a lot of momentum at one time.
I do want to find out from Sean where exactly that number is at, because I do think that's important. But we're not starting at 0, to your point.
No, not starting at 0.
So you've got about 700,000 residents in the entire county. You need 50,000 signatures to get this recall effort on the ballot. Now, Frank White denied interview requests yesterday to talk about the recall effort picking up some steam, but he did put out a statement, and here is his statement. I'll read part of his statement because if I read the whole thing, I'm going to just jump out the window here. This recall effort is nothing more than a political sideshow funded by a dark money group and led by individuals who prioritize self-promotion over the future of Jackson County. Oh, my gosh. Can you think of anybody in charge in the county who is promoting and prioritizing self-promotion over the future of Jackson County?
I'm getting pissed now.
Can you think of anybody? Like maybe the man in the mirror who is putting out the statement.
If he stepped down, would anything change, really?
Well, I don't have a ton of faith in some of the people that may want to seek that position, but I will say this much, Mark, to your question, it can't get any worse. All right? At least they would figure out how to spend $70 million that the feds plopped in their lap 3 years ago, and they're going up against the deadline where they would have to give the money back to the federal government if they can't figure out what to do with it. Goes on to say here, a failed politician who took part in the events of January 6th has teamed up with a first-term legislator who consistently puts his own ambitions ahead of honesty and the interests of the people who elected him. Now, I don't know. I got to ask Sean Smith, was he a J6 guy? I don't know. I assume he's talking about Sean Smith there. There's nobody else in the legislature who's really like a Republican, so I don't know if that's a shot. It's got to be a shot at Sean Smith. And then first-term legislator who constantly puts his ambitions ahead of honesty, that would be Manny Abarca. And listen, that's a fair characterization. But once in a while, the blind squirrel does find the nut. And that's how I view Manny in his handling of Frank White. Frank White's statement adds, their goal is not to serve the residents of Jackson County. It's to distract, intimidate, and turn back the clock on the progress that we've made. What progress has there been in Jackson County under Frank White's leadership? I mean, I am genuinely asking this question to you. I don't know everything. Some of you think I do. I'm kidding. I don't know everything. I would be glad to put people on the air to kick off the show on a Thursday that can tell me all the great progress Frank White has made in Jackson County. Has he kept things somewhat stable in some aspects of county leadership? I guess. But the big things, the big boulders, the things that you have to move to be considered a successful county executive, like not screwing people on their taxes, like not having people get evicted from their own homes because they can't pay the bills, like figuring out how to keep two professional teams who are crown jewels in the region, in your county, in your city, where they've been for the better part of 50-plus years at this point? What else do you want to add to that list? I'm genuinely curious. If you are a Jackson County resident, what grade would you give Frank White right now? A+ all the way down to an F. I mean, you can just text it in. You can call in, you can text it in. I don't much care. I just want to see your answers, because if I'm off base here, I'm off base here. I don't think I will be, but I'm happy to be. 913-408-7957. Now, what we also know is that the legislature may very well kick the can down the road on the COVID relief money that they were up against a deadline on. They can basically put it into a general fund that would then allow them to decide in the new year how to spend the money. So that is another joke. Basically, it buys them time to figure out what to do with the $70 million, because they were up against the deadline this week, and if they hadn't figured out how to spend the money, they were going to have to give it back to the federal government. So now they're putting it into a fund that will allow them to figure out in the new year how to spend the money, John.
Well, they'll have it done by January, Pete.
January of what year, 27?
Exactly. Right.
2030? I mean, what year are we talking about here?
The World Cup will have come and gone.
Yeah, it'll be long gone. Long gone. Text line, Pete, I'm a C, I'm a D, I'm an F, D-. Okay, I'm just reading some of your answers here. On the text line, Pete, you're killing me. My Frank White bobblehead on eBay is down to 86 cents. Oh, gosh. I can't help you on that front. By the end of this show, I want it down to 68 cents, okay? I want that thing plummeting. I want you to have to pay somebody to take that Frank White bobblehead off your hands. That's where that thing's going to be worth by the end of the show, by the time we get 10 o'clock this morning.
I'm not sure if that's not a different guy. You know, I don't know if aliens have taken over the politician's body, but the bobblehead might be safe still.
Yeah, you're right. Just sell it to somebody who is not a resident around here, who doesn't know anything about the politics, and just is like, great ball player. Great ball player. 913-4087-95.7. It's good to be here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. The spending in D.C. is coming down to the wire as well, just like in Jackson County. That's all coming up, plus you, Pete Mundo, 6:15, and Mayor Lucas in studio at 7:30. Well, Congress is going down to the wire with this continuing resolution that they are continuing to try to figure out here as they get set to potentially have a government shutdown. Now, you know as well as I do, the government can never shut down. Oh, my, no, we're all going to die. What are we going to do if the government shuts down? Shut the whole damn thing down. I don't care. I don't. I'm over it. This is the biggest joke of all jokes that you could possibly have in a spending bill package. This is a classic example. Here's what went on here, and here's what's going on here. Basically, this is Chuck Schumer's last stand to try to blow out the deficit on his way out the door as Senate Majority Leader. That's what this is. They basically know that they have Republicans by the short hairs because, obviously, when you have a bill like this, it's got to pass through everybody. And Republicans, technically at this point, until next month, only have the House, right? And they have a razor-thin majority in the House. So they've got the House, but Biden's in the White House still. I mean, he's physically there. He may not be there. Come on, man. But he's physically there. Someone's still signing his name on papers and things like that. Whether or not it's Jill or not, I don't know. But someone's there on his behalf. And then Chuck Schumer's running the Senate. So they are all set up to try to get one last bite at the apple, one last chance to just blow it out, spend as much money as they possibly can, inflation and the little guy be damned, and Republicans are sitting there basically having to twiddle their thumbs. But there's a lot of pressure coming on Republicans as well here from people like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy are saying, you guys can't pass this. You cannot in good conscience try to get home by Christmas to pass this bill to basically keep the government funded through the spring. You can't do it. Josh Hawley was on Fox News last night and said this.
You're right. It is 1,500 pages of pork barrel spending. And worse than that, it's all the woke garbage. It's the censorship boards. They're getting funded in this. There's hundreds of millions of dollars for a recycling access center in this bill. I mean, it is a total offense. And you pointed out, there's also the pay raise for members of Congress. There's the Obamacare carve-out for members of Congress. Here's the thing that really gets me. Republicans negotiated this. The Speaker of the House negotiated this bill. It is a total travesty. This has got to change, Sean. I mean, we cannot go on like this. And I hope that Republican leadership gets the message here, the message of this election, which is that people want change. They don't want this garbage. I'm a hard no on this thing. It is a joke. It is a travesty. And they need to go back to square one.
That was Josh Hawley last night on Fox News, of course, Missouri U.S. Senator. So he alluded to some of the things there. Pay raises for members of Congress, expansion of their federal health benefits. You've got renewing the Global Engagement Center, providing funding for 12 biolabs, billions of dollars in foreign aid. Now, there are some good things in there, of course, and this is always how it works, right? There's about $100 billion in there for disaster relief for places that were crushed by the hurricanes. More than necessary based on what I've read and heard. But if you vote no on this and you're a Republican in Florida or North Carolina or Georgia, what are you going to do? Your people need the money right now. Your people desperately need help. You're in a tough spot. And that is what Anna Paulina, who represents Florida, a district that was hit hard by the hurricanes, that's basically what she admitted yesterday outside of the Capitol building.
The fact is that, look, this is a sandwich. I don't know how else to say that. We're being forced into this position. They could have done a standalone. They did this because they knew that it would put members in this position to support it. We're damned if we do. We're damned if we don't.
So, like, she represents a part of Florida that got hit hard. She's a Republican. She called it an S sandwich. It is an S sandwich. I like that. But at the same time, are you going to vote against your own people who really need the help right now? Your own constituents. Not only is that something that will maybe not allow you to sleep well at night, it also could hurt you politically down the road. You want to be the person in Congress who, when your people needed it, you didn't vote on a bill that would help them with disaster relief in the wake of the hurricanes? It's easy to sit there right now and say, nope, you got to stand firm. You can't vote for it. No. You meet your constituents, and they are in desperate need of help. It is easy for us here in Kansas City to say that. It's easy for us in Kansas and Missouri to come to that conclusion. When you're the one on the front lines on behalf of your constituents, and they've been through hell the last few months in places like Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, what are you going to do? I still would vote no on it. I'm just saying that's what I would do. But I understand where some Republicans right now find themselves in a bind. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, I mean, he's put himself in a very difficult spot here because now there's rumblings as to whether or not Mike Johnson is going to be the Speaker of the House. I don't think that's entirely fair by any stretch of the imagination. And Mike Johnson's basically saying, we've got to do this now and basically rip the Band-Aid off to give Donald Trump a runway when he gets to office in January. And I understand that to some degree, but my gosh, if there's ever a time for Republicans to have a bit of a backbone on this stuff, it feels like it would be right now, based on what just happened on November 5. And there are no real political ramifications because it's not like we're coming up on some midterm, right? It's not like you're shutting down the government in September of 2026 right before the midterms. No one's going to remember this thing. You know, there have been a handful of government shutdowns. 4 major government shutdowns since 1981. 2 back in 96. Another one in 2014. That's when Ted Cruz was getting yelled at for shutting down the national parks. I can't go see the buffalo. Open the parks, Ted. And then in 2019, that was the longest one. That was 34 days. As far as I know, the combined shutdown death toll was 0. So the people freaking out about, how are we ever going to operate? I'm just not there right now. I don't want to hear it. Okay? I don't want to hear it. I know you can't get everything you want, but don't get screwed this bad, guys. For your own sake, don't do it. 913-408-7957. Speaking of getting hosed, what is the Fed doing? We'll get to that and more next. Yesterday, the Federal Reserve cut by another 0.25 percentage point, 25 basis points cut by the Fed. And the markets didn't like it one bit. Not at all. And if you missed it, the Dow plunged more than 1,100 points. And, well, let's let CNBC share the story, as they were obviously very concerned yesterday when the markets closed.
If you're just joining us, we had a major sell-off on Wall Street late in the session after the Fed indicated fewer rate cuts may be on the horizon. Next year, it was a hawkish cut, is what we got today. The Dow falling more than 1,100 points, notching its longest losing streak since 1974. The Nasdaq shedding more than 3%, and the volatility index spiking to 28.
So the volatility index, that may also be driven by what's happening on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. right now, where they are trying to avoid the government shutdown if they can't get a continuing resolution done by the end of the week. But overall, you had Jerome Powell cut interest rates. Now, he did it by 0.25 point. He did it by 0.5 point earlier in the year. But I don't know about you. I sat back when I saw the news yesterday and I said, why? Inflation is still sticky. Every indication suggests that we have not come close to beating inflation. So why is Jerome Powell doing this? I mean, he did say, or I should say he insinuated he was going to do this. But guess what? You can easily come back if you're the Fed and say, listen, we don't think we should be doing this right now. Now, the Fed did reduce their outlook from 3 to 2 rate cuts in 2025, which means they're basically signaling we're not getting a lot of cuts in 2025 as things stay where they are. But I wouldn't have even done it yesterday. That is not what this market and the economy needs right now. So how does Jerome Powell explain it? Well, in classic Jerome Powell fashion, he's got a little Kamala Harris to him. He's rambling and mumbling and bumbling for about a minute and a half here when he probably could have said what he said in about 15 to 20 seconds. But I'll torture you for a little bit with Jerome Powell, Fed chair. Here he is yesterday when he announced the 25-point basis cut.
Why do you think it is that inflation is proving to be more stubborn than you'd expected?
You know, it breaks down into a long answer if you want, but it just has been a little bit more stubborn. I think if you go back 2 or 3 years, many people were saying that to get this far down, we would have had to had a deep recession and, high unemployment by now. Well, that has not been the case. So, the path down has actually been much better than many predicted. We've managed to have the unemployment rate remain essentially at its longer run natural rate, while inflation has come down from, core PCE inflation has come down from 5.6% to 2.8% on a 12-month basis. So that's a pretty good outcome. Why hasn't it come down? One reason is that just a technical issue around the way we calculate housing services, and that process has been slower than market rents are showing up more slowly in that measure than we might have thought 2 years ago. So that's part of it. I think there are other parts of the story, but what I think people are feeling right now is the effect of high prices, not high inflation. So
What?
Oh, there's a difference. I didn't know that.
What is the difference, Jerome Powell, between high prices and high inflation? Can somebody explain that to me like I'm my 9-month-old? Even my 3.5 or 6-year-old. Explain to me, Jerome Powell, what the difference is between high prices and high inflation. That is the most moronic thing I've ever heard somebody say in Jerome Powell's chair.
What I think people are feeling right now is the effect of high prices, not high inflation. So we understand very well that prices went up by a great deal, and people really feel that. And it's prices of food and transportation and heating your home and things like that. So there's tremendous pain in that burst of inflation that was very global.
Oh, my gosh. I cannot get over the guy saying what he just said. Yes, and then he goes on to list all the things that have gone up over the last few years, right? So the inflation number, just so you're on the same page as we are here, the most recent inflation number came in at 2.7%. Now, you might say, hey, that's pretty good. I mean, I suppose it's better than, 10%, yes. But when you stack it up over the last few years, you had 2.7 in November of 2024. You had 3.1 in November of 2023. In November of 22, we were at 7. So do the math with me. We're up to about 13% over the last 3 years, really 2 years and change. And then you go back to November of 2021, it was 6.8%. That's another rounded up to 7%. You're pushing 20% on the inflation number over the last 4 years. So bragging about being back towards the goal of 2% is great. But even the Fed's goals, they pushed back yesterday. So the Fed thought it was going to get down to 2% inflation. Their goal was to get it in 2026. Well, now they're saying, it's looking like 2027 until they can achieve their target of 2% annual inflation. 2027. It's 3 years away to get down to the target goal of 2% inflation. So bragging about how, we're getting closer to it. Well, once again, it compounds on top of itself. And I know most of you know that, but there's a lot of people that just want to, like Joe Biden, he would always brag about inflation's down. It doesn't mean prices are down. It just means they're not growing as quickly as they used to. And they were growing at 40-year highs early in his term. So this is nothing to like sit back and say, well, this is just great news because prices are down. No, they're not down. They're just not increasing as quickly. And then you got Jerome Powell getting up there yesterday and saying, I don't really think that prices and inflation are the same thing.
What I think people are feeling right now is the effect of high prices, not high inflation.
I may have to get a plaque of that quote. Just like we've got the Kamala plaque right outside the studio, it is time for us to be doing what we have been doing, and that time is every day. That is the esteemed vice president who has a quote on a plaque right outside of the studio. We tap it every morning, just like Notre Dame football taps play like a champion.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
It is. Jerome Powell put himself in that category yesterday.
What I think people are feeling right now is the effect of high prices, not high inflation.
That's an all-timer. And it tells you a lot about how we got here. Charlie Gasparino, our good friend at Fox Business, is going to be here at 8 o'clock. Charlie put up this morning, last hour, on X, quote, I kind of feel sorry for Jerome Powell. He engaged in some reckless behavior by printing money while Biden was spending like crazy, all during an economic rebound. If there was ever a recipe for inflation, this is it. Then he tried to put the genie back in the bottle, and Biden is gone. Now Powell is left with the absolute mess to clean up that they both created, a.k.a. inflation, which is still sticky, combined with price levels of goods and services consumed by the middle class that are still too high. Well, I will ask Charlie about that. I mean, I have absolutely no sympathy for Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell was slow on admitting inflation was happening. Now, he wasn't as bad as Janet Yellen, who was like, it's all transitory. She's the Treasury Secretary. Nothing to see here. It's just transitory. We'll be fine. But Powell didn't help his cause. I know he's got to be apolitical, but anybody who's got, an Econ 101 course under their belt who isn't a super partisan knew what was coming with the spending that this government was doing, especially when Biden took office. And Powell just sat back and tried to smell the roses and thought he could beat it. And now look at where we're at. 913-408-7957. That's the text line here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. Pete, I can't believe what a liar Jerome Powell is in that clip. I know. Me neither. I can't believe it either. I didn't think he'd go there, but he went there. The Kansas City Star is doing its best to defend Jean Peters Baker, although they did make a good point. I will give them this one good point that they made when it came to something tied to the Chiefs and a decision by the governor of Missouri, next on KCMO Talk Radio. Well, we're all sitting around wondering, waiting, trying to figure out what exactly, or I suppose if, dare I say, Missouri Governor Mike Parson is going to potentially pardon former KCPD detective Eric DeValcanair, who was involved, of course, in the shooting of Cameron Lamb in Kansas City going on 5 years ago. But if you're not familiar with the story, if you don't really know it all that well, a judge ended up sentencing DeValcanair, convicting him, sentencing him in the bench trial a couple of years back. It was not a jury trial. And there is a lot of debate as to whether or not Cameron Lamb was armed when DeValcanair shot him. The individuals who claimed that Cameron Lamb was unarmed had changed their story on multiple occasions, didn't seem all that credible. It was a case where clearly there was a lot of political pressure that was being put on by Jackson County Prosecutor Jean Peters Baker. And she ultimately ended up getting DeValcanair put behind bars. She has been the worst thing to happen to safety in Kansas City, Missouri proper, and Jackson County. She's leaving, thank goodness, next month. She elected to not run for re-election. Thank goodness. We'll see how her successor, Melissa Johnson, does when she takes over next month. She is a Democrat who won the general election last month in Jackson County in that prosecutor's race. So anyway, the Star writes this piece here. Prosecutor on Parson not calling DeValcanair's victim's family. It's cruel, really. So basically, the piece goes on the note that Mike Parson never called Cameron Lamb's family. And now there are rumors that he is going to potentially pardon former Detective Eric DeValcanair. Now, I don't know, is Mike Parson supposed to call everybody who is a victim of crime in Kansas City? Because guess what? Based on the people in charge, that would take quite a long time. Who is Mike Parson supposed to call? Who is he not supposed to call? What is your protocol, Melinda Hennenberg at the Kansas City Star and Gene Peters Baker, on when exactly Mike Parson should be calling a family who lost a loved one due to gun violence in Kansas City? Because that would be a very long list. Is he supposed to call every time gangbangers are shooting each other up and killing each other on the streets? Do you want him to call them too? Where do you draw the line? I'm just wondering, I mean, you've set this weird, bizarre new standard that Mike Parson is supposed to call the family of Cameron Lamb. So I'm just wondering who else he should be calling and why. Star goes on the right here, Melinda Hennenberg. Jackson County Prosecutor Gene Peters Baker is wrapping up her many years of principled public service to this community. Sorry. Mark, clean up aisle 4. Just threw up in here. Okay? And Missouri Governor Mike Parson is leaving office too. At the end of a 90-minute exit interview with Baker about her cases, controversies, and 87% prosecution rate of all property crimes. Oh, what is this, a propaganda piece for crying out loud? Holy jeez, you're going to have to use the dump button on me if I'm not careful. Oh. Yes, Gene has done such a great job. Oh, we almost bowed down to the great Gene Peters Baker, Jackson County prosecutor. No one could have done it better. That's why she realized that she was so unpopular, she decided not to run for re-election. Yep, that's it. Oh, my gosh. Oh, this is just filthy. I'm just getting the ick reading it. In 2021, writes Hennenberger, her office prosecuted DeValcanair, the first police officer in Kansas City ever found guilty of killing a black man, 26-year-old Cameron Lamb. Ever since, Parson has been saying DeValcanair was wrongfully convicted by a political prosecutor who was playing games. You might have noticed that there is never a second sentence explaining what exactly about the law Baker and every judge who looked at the case got wrong. Instead, it's just that the convict is one of the good guys, and the woman who convicted him is not. Well, that's not true. Baker hasn't heard anything about what Parson is doing, she said, but does know that he hasn't called Cameron Lamb's family ever. She also goes on to say here, the victims weren't contacted in the Reed case either. That's referring to Britt Reed. They write here, last March, Parson commuted the sentence of former Kansas City Chiefs assistant Britt Reed, who permanently injured a 5-year-old while driving drunk. It's cruel, really. She also asked why, if Parson really thought DeValcanair was wrongfully convicted, he let him serve 426 days behind bars as of yesterday, when he could have pardoned him at any time. Now, like I said, the blind squirrel does find the nut once in a while, and that is a fair point to bring up. First off, the Britt Reed thing is what it is. We all know that if Britt Reed is not Andy Reid's kid, he's not getting a commuted sentence from Mike Parson. Okay? That's a fact. Say about that what you will, but it's absolutely true. And it's a shame because if Eric DeValcanair's last name was Reed, maybe he'd be home by now. Just saying. Right? I mean, let's just call it like it is. That is a very fair critique to bring up by Melinda Hennenberger and Gene Peters Baker in this piece in the Kansas City Star. Very fair. And if Parson does believe that DeValcanair was wrongfully convicted, then why is he still sitting there? Why are we playing political games? And if he doesn't, that is his prerogative. We know at worst, Mike Kehoe is going to have the guy home for lunch on Monday, January 13th. So then I'm fine. At this point, for the sake of the family, if I'm Mike Parson, just say if you're doing it or not. Like, if you're not doing it, just tell us. Just tell the family. Let them have some peace with it and know that Kehoe's going to take care of it in a couple of weeks. Because I'm telling you right now, they are going through hell. They are wondering, is he going to be home in 6 days for Christmas? I still hope and pray that he will. But if not, just say I'm not doing it. Because we all know that worst case, Kehoe will take care of it on day one. He said as much. So let's just handle it that way. I do think that's the best way to do it. But I am warning you to not go out there and read this piece in the Kansas City Star, because if not, or if you do, you will be throwing up in your mouth as well. Or in my case, all over the studio. So we got to clean up during the commercial break in here. I don't want it to stink for Keatsman when he gets in at 10 o'clock. So there's a lot of bad and just dumb stuff that is in this bill that Congress is trying to jam through before the holidays, hoping that nobody really is paying attention, right? 1,500-page bill. You know what's buried in this thing? Couple $2 billion buried in this thing to transfer the RFK Stadium site to Washington, D.C., which would set the stage for a new Washington Commanders, formerly Redskins, stadium. Yes, I think Clark Hunt needs to make a call here. I think Clark Hunt needs to say, listen, my voters in Jackson County turned down upgrades to Arrowhead. Clark Hunt has donated generously to politicians over the years, I'm sure, as has the family. Why don't we get something in this bill that gets the Chiefs a new stadium? I can't say the Royals because Major League Baseball just doesn't have the juice that the NFL has. But hell, if they're spending money on stadiums in Washington, D.C., why not here in Kansas City? What kind of bias is that? We've been looking for ways to pay for a new stadium. Maybe we could finally get that roof and get a Super Bowl, ideally a rolling roof. I don't want to lose the outdoor element to Arrowhead. But how about that for an idea? I say this all very much tongue-in-cheek, as I'm sure many of you are figuring out, but how comical is it that as they try to pass this CR bill, they are including money for a new NFL stadium? They're not going to put it to a vote of the people in Washington, D.C. They're not going to try to increase their taxes. They'll just slip it into this bill that also has $100 billion in it, of course, for disaster relief in places hit hard by hurricanes. And then they'll say to Republicans, well, don't you care about the people in Florida and South Carolina and North Carolina? Aren't you going to help them with the hurricanes? By the way, we need a new stadium in D.C., so we're going to slip that one in as well. This is the shell game that's being played. And it happens every single time. And it's so transparent what's going on here. I mean, if you're paying any ounce of attention, you know exactly what's going on here. So you've got this must-pass bill. Government's going to shut down. And, oh, by the way, can we get $2 to $3 billion in this 1,500-page bill for a new NFL stadium? It's just gross on so many levels. And, of course, what do they call it? Economic development. Let's be honest. It's a taxpayer-funded playground for NFL elites, lobbyists, and VIPs, while schools, healthcare, infrastructure are left on the bench. That's always how this works. This is no different. And the other thing that it does, it's a very small example of it, but you know what else this does? This also makes inflation worse. Prime example of supply and demand issues here, right? There are going to be many companies that will spend months, if not years, building this new stadium if this bill does pass. Well, those are companies and jobs and people who now won't be working on other projects. What does that do? That puts upward pressure from a price perspective on any other project that these people would have been doing, these companies would have been doing. The government is creating, they're creating fake demand in a marketplace. And that will drive up the cost on every developer, which will then filter down to Main Street, to regular people on any project, whether you're talking about building office space, whether you're talking about building restaurants, whether you're talking about building whatever, mixed use, it doesn't matter. It puts pressure on the entire system because the government is printing money and being competitive in a space it has no business being involved in, like building stadiums. This is not about a vote by the people to, let's say, continue a sales tax that then pays for a stadium. It's completely different. It's a completely different element and beast than what you're talking about here. And that's why this is something that if you're looking at it, just bipartisan, got nothing to do left, right, blue, red, it doesn't matter. And throw it all out the window. This screws the little guy. And there's downward pressures on the entire system that people, if they're being honest with themselves, have to acknowledge. And Washington, D.C. has to acknowledge, but they don't care. They just don't care. So I hope this thing goes down in flames, and if it causes a government shutdown, so be it. It's time for people to wake up. You're not going to believe who is looking for and may ultimately get a $20 million book deal. Kamala Harris. Maybe we can get some of those fine quotes. You got that for me, Mark, by chance? Maybe the book can be titled this.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
That sounds like a great book title. Doesn't it sound like a pretty good book title to you? I don't know. Joe Biden can write the foreword. Yeah, I think it's perfect, John. A little long, but kind of fits the billing. I mean, she always would say more words than were necessary to get her point across. So it only seems reasonable to assume, to stay in character, that her book would be titled something that is far too long for a book title.
Well, a book is a collection of pages which contain a series of words, and those pages then are binded together as chapters, and we call that a book.
Such a cute soundbite.
Oh, it's very well done. So Kamala Harris blew through $1.5 billion, lost the presidential election. Top publishers are telling the Daily Mail that they are apparently willing to pay the soon-to-be former VP and twice-failed Democratic presidential hopeful a whopping advance of $20 million. Now, apparently, what this is also going to include is an inside look at Joe Biden's White House and a presidential campaign tell-all. See, I don't want that from Kamala Harris. I would actually take that from like a low-level staffer. I would pay them $20 million to get the real scoop and the real dirt. But Kamala's not going to give you the real – I mean, she may give some dirt on Biden, but I want the dirt on her. That's what I want the dirt on, John, not on Joe. I mean, most of the dirt on Joe is out there. I mean, the guy's clearly not all there. We know about the allegations of corruption, which I think are now beyond reasonable to assume with the pardons he's handed out, and more to come, I would imagine, too. So that's not the tell-all I want. I don't need the Biden tell-all. I want the Harris tell-all on how you blow through $1.5 billion in 90 days on a campaign and get smoked in the process. Although maybe she can use some of that $20 million to pay all the debt that she's racked up and the money that she owes to vendors around the country. Jeff's in Kansas City. You're on KCMO. What's up, Jeff?
Good morning. You know, it just reminds me of something I saw recently on a training video. It's an old training video at work, and this is like a pearl of wisdom that's just priceless. And this guy said, you know, sometimes you just need to keep your mouth shut because it's that inner idiot that wants to escape and say stupid things. And, I mean, maybe that should be the title of her book, The Inner Idiot.
That's pretty good.
Merry Christmas.
The Inner Idiot. Merry Christmas to you, too. That's not bad. That's not bad. The Inner Idiot. That's got a nice ring to it, actually. It's a lot shorter than what I recommended, but it also has that's very effective. That works out pretty well. 913-408-7957. I guess we'll take your book recommendations Here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM. We're streaming, of course, on the KCMO Talk Radio app. No, come on. Keep it FCC friendly on the text line now, please. Come on. Don't get me in trouble here. You like the show? Don't get me in trouble now. Don't do it. Sometimes I start reading a text, and then, I realize I can't read that. So I got to be very careful here. Tim in the Northland, you're on KCMO. Go ahead.
You know what the proper title for the book is, Mondo? It's called Word Salad.
Oh, very good. Very good. Word salad. Family friendly. Nice job.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
All right. That's good, Tim. I like that. That's actually an excellent title. Word salad. And then, the subheadline can be what we recommended earlier in the segment.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
Boom. We got it. We got the book lined up for Kamala. We'll take a 10% royalty fee off of that. Kick 5% up to Tim in the Northland, and then Mark, John, and myself will use it, the other 5% as we see fit. There you go. I like it. Well done. Very nice job on the text line and also on the phones this morning here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Coming up, I think we're headed towards a government shutdown. Oh, the horror. No, it's going to be okay. We're going to make it.